Warning: the following video contains images and spoken word that may be too intense for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
Mark Hadley was no stranger to old houses. As a contractor specializing in renovations, he'd seen his share of creaking floorboards, peeling wallpaper, and eerie attics. But this job was different. The house on Sycamore Lane had stood vacant for over 50 years, leaning slightly to one side like it was exhausted from standing so long. It was the kind of place kids dared each other to approach on Halloween. Mark had been hired by a wealthy client who had recently purchased the property site unseen at an estate auction. His task was straightforward: gut the interior, replace what needed replacing, and modernize the house without erasing its historic charm. Easy enough, or so he thought. The first few days were uneventful. Mark and his crew stripped the walls, tore up the warped floorboards, and carted away heaps of debris. Beneath the grime, the house revealed hints of its former beauty: ornate moldings, a grand staircase, and stained glass windows covered in decades of dust. On the fourth day, Mark decided to tackle the basement alone. His crew had gone home early due to a power outage, and he figured he could at least clear some of the junk piled up down there. He grabbed a flashlight and descended the narrow, rickety stairs. The basement smelled of damp earth and mildew. The beam of his flashlight swept across crumbling stone walls, rusted shelves, and stacks of rotting wood. Cobwebs clung to the ceiling like tattered drapes. Mark wrinkled his nose and muttered under his breath. He was halfway through clearing a pile of debris when his foot struck something solid. Frowning, he knelt down and brushed away the dirt. His fingers scraped against smooth, cold bone. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He shone the flashlight closer and saw the unmistakable curve of a skull. "What the hell?" he whispered. He uncovered more bones, ribs, vertebrae, and long femurs. The skeleton was remarkably intact, curled in a fetal position as though the person had died trying to protect themselves. Fragments of decayed clothing clung to the remains, and a rusted locket hung from the neck. Mark's first thought was to call the police, but something about the scene made him hesitate. The bones looked old, ancient even, and the way they were positioned felt off, as if whoever this was hadn't simply died here but had been deliberately placed. His fingers trembled as he picked up the locket. The metal was corroded, but he managed to pry it open. Inside was a tiny, faded photograph of a woman with dark curls and a somber expression. A sudden chill swept through the basement, and the flashlight flickered. Mark's breath caught in his throat. He told himself it was just a draft, just faulty wiring. But deep down, he knew better. The air grew heavy, pressing down on him like an invisible weight. The shadows seemed to shift, coalescing into shapes that danced at the edges of his vision. A low whisper echoed through the basement, indistinct but insistent. Mark stood up, his pulse hammering. "Hello?" he called out, his voice wavering. The whispering stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, without warning, the flashlight went out, plunging the basement into darkness. Mark's breath came in rapid gasps. He fumbled with the flashlight, smacking it against his palm until it flickered back to life. The beam wavered, casting long, jittery shadows across the walls. That's when he saw it. A figure stood at the far end of the basement, barely visible in the dim light. It was tall and gaunt, its skin a sickly gray. Empty eye sockets stared back at him, and a gaping mouth stretched into a grotesque grin. Mark stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the skeleton. "No," he whispered. "This isn't real." The figure took a step forward, its bones creaking like old wood. Mark's instincts kicked in, and he turned and bolted up the stairs, taking them two at a time. He didn't stop until he was outside, gulping in the cool evening air. His crew found him there the next morning, pale and shaken. "Boss, you okay?" one of them asked. Mark opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. How could he explain what he'd seen without sounding insane? He forced himself to go back into the house, determined to finish the job. He asked his men to check the basement. They returned and said they found nothing but debris down there. Mark felt a little ashamed about being frightened, but he never wanted to go back down in the basement, and only sent his workers down to work there. But he tried shrugging it off to overworking, or maybe the stress of the job. As the weeks went by, strange things began to happen. Tools went missing, only to reappear in odd places. The sound of footsteps echoed through the house when no one was around. Workers reported hearing whispers and feeling cold spots.